Part 10. Visiting Hours. Pescadero State Hospital, 3:06 p.m. Slashes of sunlight fell across Sarah's bruised face. She was sitting on the bed, her back against the wall, drifting. Her cheek twitched and her eyes darted under the lids. She was breathing raggedly, exhausted, yet trying to stay conscious, to fight her way out of the drug-induced coma. She was beginning to lose, slowly falling back into herself and the sad, lonely coldness of meaningless oblivion, when a hand gently stroked her cheek. The fingers brushed her skin lightly, and the lethargy seemed to shatter like plate glass. "Sarah, wake up," a familiar voice whispered. Sarah opened her eyes and looked up at the man sitting on the edge of her bed. He had scruffy blonde hair and wore a long, soiled raincoat. His eyes were soft, young, adoring, although his face was scarred, weathered by a brutal childhood. A tingle went up the back of her neck, and she stopped breathing. It was Kyle Reese. Hot tears painfully welled. The vision of him wavered. She wanted to see him clearly, but was afraid to blink, lest he disappear. "Kyle?" she whispered. He didn't answer at first, but he was no ghost. She could feel the heat of his hand against her cheek, and there was so much love in his expression. Love for her. Love that inspired him to give his life for her. His life. The impossibility of the situation hit like a hammer blow to her temple. "You can't be here. You're dead," she sighed. He nodded and answered in that high, soft voice that reminded her how really young this battle-scarred veteran had been. "I know. This is a dream, Sarah." "Yeah, I thought so. The Thorazine. They shouldn't make me take..." They gazed longingly into each other's eyes, and for a moment all the horror and pain and death Sarah carried with her since he died was set aside, so that she could feel the love for him underneath, pure and strong as the moment they had made love. She wanted to reach out and touch him, but her arms felt like lead weights. "Hold me," she whispered. Kyle pulled her into an embrace and gently rocked her. Now the tears came, rolling down her cheeks against the smooth, warm skin of his chest. He spoke again, tenderly. "I love you. I always will." "Oh God, Kyle, I need you so much." He lifted her chin and kissed her on the mouth, his lips lightly brushing hers at first, then pressing harder as their passion built. "Oh God," she thought, "I can taste him." The powerful ache in her stomach melted away, replaced by a stirring below as the solid feel of him seemed to bring her back to life. She pressed her face into his shoulder, weeping uncontrollably, losing the edge she had been so carefully building the last 10 years, feeling it sandblasted back by the intense love she felt for this dead man. This time, when he spoke, his voice was strangely cold. "Where's John, Sarah?" Suddenly, there was an empty space where he had been. Gasping, she opened her eyes. Kyle was now standing across the room, pinning her with an accusing gaze. She had never seen that expression on his face before. It sent a shudder of black guilt through her body. "They took him away from me," she said quietly. "It's John who's the target now. You have to protect him. He's wide open." "I know!" Frustrated, Sarah tried to rise, to reach out for him, but somehow her body wouldn't work. "Don't quit, Sarah. Our son needs you." She struggled to stop crying, but it was like holding back a tidal wave. She hadn't cried for a long time, but here, in front of Kyle, she couldn't stop. I know he needs me, but I'm not as strong as I'm supposed to be. Nobody believes me, not even him. I've lost him. I'm screwing up the mission. On your feet, soldier, he said, lifting her off the bed. Remember the message, Sarah. The future is not set. There is no fate but what we make for ourselves. He was reminding her of the message the adult John Connor had told Kyle to give her when he first arrived. It had stirred in her a sense of her own destiny, as it was intended to do. She often thought of that phrase over the years, but in the last few months she had forgotten it. In the overwhelming animalistic drive to escape this place, she had forgotten a lot. Too much. Kyle turned towards the door. Her heart stammered against her ribcage. Kyle, don't go! He slowly faced her, a reprimand in his voice. There's not much time left in the world, Sarah. Then he opened the door and walked out. Sarah strained to move her legs, but they were like lifeless tubes. She looked up at the open door, frantic. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, she staggered across the room. She yanked on the closing door and slipped out into the corridor. She looked one way, empty. Kyle! She shouted, panicked. She turned the other way. Impossibly, he was already 100 feet away, striding away down the dim corridor, silhouetted in raincoat, disappearing around a corner. Sarah ran after him, her bare feet slapping the cold linoleum, her hospital gown floating out behind her. It seemed as if the corridor were tilting upward, as if it was on a gigantic treadmill. The corner seemed to stretch away from her endlessly. With a surge of energy, she finally reached the corner and slid around it. Reese was just ahead, turning another corner. She came after him, hesitating at the intersection. Kyle stood at the end of the hall before a double door. He opened it and stepped through, emerging into a beautiful, sunlit morning. Sarah ran along the corridor and burst out onto green grass. She looked around. It was a playground filled with giggling children, sliding down slides, clambering through a jungle gym, arcing high in swings. Reese was gone. An overwhelming sense of dread rose like screaming lava. She was just about to see the worst thing in the world. She opened her mouth to howl a protest, but no sound came out. It was too late. There was nothing she could do but watch as a second sunrise blossomed on the horizon. The sky was suddenly bled of all colour. Then everything exploded, followed by a searing shockwave of intense heat. Sarah could see it rolling across the horizon, blackening everything it touched, shrivelling trees, houses, and roads into steaming slag. Then it reached the playground. In the unholy glare, hotter than 1,000 suns, the children ignited like match heads. Sarah, too, was burning, still trying to scream as she watched their flesh being blasted off to reveal gleaming white bone. There was no sound, no escape from the indescribably obscene images. And there was too much light, more light than was ever meant to be, mercilessly illuminating the death agonies of the children as they writhed like charred worms on the heat-rippled ground. She reached out, gripping the smoking fence, her hands flaming. The blast wave whipped across the seared horizon like a near-solid wall of compressed air, followed by the awesome force of 250 miles per hour winds. The children, charcoal statues now frozen in positions of play, exploded and swirled away. The shockwave slammed into her, instantly tearing the carbonized flesh from her ribcage. She was sucked right into the whirling maw of the radioactive mushroom cloud itself, into the heart of the nuclear blast, where the fused matter glowed like hell, yawning open to receive her soul. Sarah turned her head away from the hot sunlight blasting in through the window, blinking back tears, gasping. Her whole body was shaking, her muscles rigid. Her hospital gown was soaked with perspiration. She opened her eyes and looked down. She was on the floor by the overturned bed. The Thorazine had unlocked the Stygian nightmare again, the nightmare that was soon to become reality. Sarah knew only too well the war was coming. She had died in it 1,000 nights. You would think each time it would become more ethereal and ineffective, as normal dreams do. But this was a vision of what was to be, and each time it got worse, as if the forces of fate that set it in motion were driving it closer with each beat of her heart. But Kyle never came to her in these dreams. What did that mean? Nothing? Or was she finally cracking, going insane, desperately seeking escape from reality, in the arms of a corpse? But no, he had said something important. Her scrambled brain struggled to remember the dream words. It was about John. He was the target now, and the world didn't have much time left. It had been her worry, from her own subconscious, but never had they been put into the mouth of Kyle Reese. Sarah felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise as a wave of dread rolled through her. Something was about to happen, and she was completely unable to stop it from here. She brushed back her matted hair and pulled herself to her feet. One way or the other, she would have to get out of here. Tonight.